guy around.
What about the people he murdered?
What murder?
Welcome back to the Hishaku Hideout. Today, we're bringing you a discussion video. And this was actually suggested to us by Miles in our Discord server, so shout out to him for the suggestion. And if you have anything you would like us to talk about on a members first or members only type content, join the Discord. The link will be in the description below, and you could put that suggestion in our content suggestions channel. But how you holding up, Dice?
Chilling. Excited to talk about a potential trio of Kagurabachi.
Ooh, that word potential always, makes people quiver. But yeah, I mean, I think there's some decent candidates here. Like, I think we can make arguments for, each person. As you can tell by the thumbnail, which ones we're talking about. And after we've kind of made our arguments for each one, at the end, me and him will decide who we think will join the trio. So Dice, I'll let you choose who we talk about first.
I guess let's start with Hiyuki, right? Let's just go by order of introduction in the story. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, so the continental threat, Hiyuki, the Pookie, and I think that everyone probably seen by now that's a mistranslation. Obviously, she's not continental level. And plus, even if she was, it was basically stated as if she lost control. So it's not like, within her means of power, but it really just meant in the terms of like Japan, which is still crazy enough firepower. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that would be quite the weapon in the trio, huh?
Hey, but I mean, don't sleep on Kazane though.
Oh God.
But
Kazane ain't gonna be in no trio, so we're not talking about Kazane.
Yeah, facts. That no trio. Fortunately we're not here to talk about Kazane, but Hiyuki. There's arguments to be had about why she could be in this trio. I think she's probably the fan favorite to be in the trio. If you had to poll, and maybe I'll put a poll up on the channel to see how everyone would vote. But maybe that's just me. I like her the most out of these three. I mean, she's a powerhouse, but I almost think like her being a powerhouse kind of works against her to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, I think Hiyuki is probably my favorite character out of the three that we're gonna talk about today. But I do agree. I think there are a couple of things that are kind of going against her in terms of at least I don't want to say criteria, but just considering everything and looking at everything and how I think a trio in Kagurabachi could mesh. There's a lot of things that make her a very interesting candidate, but also, there are things that kind of point towards her not being anything of the sort in terms of like being a member of a trio. Of course, like we just touched on her caliber in terms of power, right? Like we know she's enchanted blade level, and flame bone of the starving is, clearly this crazy just super powerful sorcery, right? And I don't even know like sorcery specific, because we don't really know the intricacies of what flame bone of the starving is, but for Hiyuki, and it's been a minute since we've seen her, right? So a lot of it is kind of like depending on how things are looking like when she comes back and under what circumstances, or under what circumstance. But for Hiyuki, I think the most interesting thing about her character is her, and we talk a lot about characters like this, but her strong sense of justice, right? Obviously, we all remember her clash with Chihiro in the Rakuzaichi, which was more a clash of ideals than anything else, right? But we also saw how they were able to compromise for the greater good and were able to kind of like align their goals for a shared objective. And so that sort of dynamic is something that is very appealing in terms of seeing more of that, because ideally she doesn't have to totally align with Chihiro for her to, make a like make her a solid member of this hypothetical trio that we're talking about. And by the way, obviously for those that don't know already, but we're talking about Chihiro. Hakuri would be obviously the second one, and then we're examining who could be this third member, right? So for Hiyuki, that's what I like the most. It's her difference in worldview compared to Chihiro. And I think it's one thing, and kind of like now talking about why I think it kind of works against her, it's because we don't really know how, like I said, in terms of the circumstance I mentioned, we don't really know how she's going to feel now that Akamura is in power, and where her debate with Chihiro is now going to lie in terms of how she's going to perceive things. So we could potentially be looking at Hiyuki as an antagonist once again, but if that isn't the case, I think it's gonna be fun seeing her little clashes alongside Chihiro.
Yeah, I personally, and I mentioned this in our last stream, our last midweek prediction stream, about how I can see Hiyuki having an arc where she becomes an obstacle in front of Chihiro again, and her power basically is tantamount to being a huge obstacle, and she could almost be like Akamura's eyes and ears on the ground, because if Akamura is out running around doing the doing like groundwork, if he's like running errands, nothing will ever get done for Chihiro, because he will ultimately be around to it'd be hard to get around him. But now I do think that even if she does become a antagonistic force again in the story, I think it will be short-lived, though. You know what I mean? Because it'll be more like she's doing what she thinks is for the greater good of Japan and the people. And I also think that's, like, as you said, like her worldview, her sense of justice. She does, tend to look at the well-being of the many, whereas Chihiro is focused on his goals and objective, but Chihiro will always do the right thing when he's in the moment. You know what I mean? He will save the people, but he's not necessarily thinking about the people that are involved, like on a grand scale. But Hiyuki, contributing that to the team could be very beneficial. It could, be the thing that helps. I don't want to say, Chihiro's pretty mature. I mean, that dude is way more mature than a lot of shonen MCs, off the rip. But I mean, like, just kind of maybe centering his vision a bit on like what can be the aftermath of all these things, and that could relate to her being a little bit contentious with a lot of Chihiro's plans. But that doesn't make her that could just enhance the dynamic of the trio, you know what I mean? That's one thing that I think would be, beneficial to have, is just kind of see the wider view of things, and her just having insider knowledge of the Kaminabi. She's from a known clan, which now that may help Soga Akamura to kind of try to make a bargain with her, try to level with her, hey, I'm a Soga, you're a Kagari clan, we, our people been in doing business with each other for a long time, just selling her a dream or whatever. And I'm not saying that's what he'll do, but you know what I mean. He has understandings of the Kagari clan, and maybe she does as well of the Soga. Maybe she has been taught a bit about the Soga at some point. We just don't know how that whole thing's going to work in the flashback. But yeah, I mean, her being a powerhouse would be a great addition to the team. It'll basically help kind of tip the scales closer to it being even, because it's way unfair right now with Akamura being out. You know what I mean? That Magasumi just makes everything unfair. And I personally think Kaguri's going to get to wield the EB. How long, who knows? But that Akamura is building an impressive team around him, I feel like, for the new Kagurabachi. So to tilt the power struggle closer to being even, which I mean still won't be, but at least gives us a better chance with Hishaku on the trio, more so than the other two. Like, we have a better chance of succeeding in terms of like battle.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I totally agree with you. I think you covered, a lot of the way how I feel as well. Because I like I said, I totally agree with this idea that she's kind of like, the way I see it is she's like in the most interesting spot right now, just because of the uncertainty surrounding how she's gonna react or respond to Akamura now being the one that's kind of leading the new Kamunabi. And as an antagonistic force, she would once again work. And like you said, even as a member of the trio that's kind of a bit more contentious, I can see her like butting heads with Chihiro, and that dynamic, like I talked about, being really fun to see, right? Obviously, Hakuri's like Chihiro's ride or die, and they usually like align on everything. But when it comes to Hishaku, it would be very interesting to see somebody in the group that isn't just down for whatever Chihiro's saying, right? Or whatever like the plan seems to be. So yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up too, with Hishaku, even if she is an antagonistic force, I just want to say, like, obviously that's not what this is about, but her sense of justice is also what limits her. Now we don't know if like the limiters that like Kazan told her, like only up to the rib cage or whatever, how like if she would have stayed true to that, but like with civilians around and Chihiro knowing that, I can see her working really well either way, kind of to your point of like she won't be like just too overpowered for Chihiro to deal with. Like maybe right now, but when the new sword's forged and Chihiro gets a bit understanding, like I could see him like beating her way easier than like beating Akamura until the end, what I mean? Like, obviously.
Yeah, no, so this is why, like, she's out of the three, she's probably my favorite. I not even probably, like, I feel pretty
her case
confident.
is unique because like we're saying she's either going to be an antagonist or in the trio, you know what I mean?
No, exactly. It's precisely what I'm getting at, and I feel like that same that uncertainty that you just pointed out is kind of like why I think she's the most interesting in terms of to look at and see what is in store for her future in the story. So
and she's already had like a team fight with Chihiro, whereas the other two, Iori's never fought with Chihiro. She's been saved by Chihiro. And Kiri's never even met Chihiro. Well, I mean, she probably did at some point in that 4-day time skip at the end of part 1, since Shiba teleported them all. But,
Yeah, I think Iori and Chihiro, the closest thing they had to a fight together was right before Samura pulled up when she awakened.
Yeah, and when she showed him the way, when she taught him. Yeah, he saved her and she saved him. If we deepen in, I guess let's talk about Iori then.
Yeah, let's do it.
Her thing is, I think that, it's never really stated like Chihiro, like good thing with Chihiro is with those eyes, right? Those Rokuhiro eyes, that he sees something once and he basically can like mimic it to a certain degree. But it was too hard for him to like, the AI White Puri style because of the re-gripping and all that. But with Iori's like textbook, like almost like mechanical like usage of it, it was easier for him to follow. So like one thing I'll say is like her like spot in the trio is more about her finding like conviction and new motivation to want to basically not kill, because I don't think she'll ever want to kill, because even Samura didn't want to see flesh being cut, but to wield a sword in order to like bring her father back. And it's about her finding her, and Chihiro would be okay, I think, with someone like that on his team, to be honest, like okay with not killing. Chihiro doesn't ask anybody to kill for him.
Yeah, I think I said Hiyuki I thought was like kind of in the most interesting position out of the three. I think Iori is in the second most interesting position, just based on like how we left off in part one. Her holding on to Tobimune, the implications that breaking Tobimune with the new enchanted blade that Chihiro forges could possibly pave the way for like Samura coming back via the Black Flames. And there's kind of like this lingering question of if in the meantime she will get to wield Tobimune, and what does that mean for not just her character but also this hypothetical trio, right? Chihiro with his enchanted blade, Hakuri with the storehouse and Iso, and now Iori with Tobimune, right? Obviously with Hiyuki it would have been Hiyuki with Flamebone like we already talked about, but with Iori there's the whole Samura connection, and a really well fleshed out connection, and as well as the parallels to Chihiro. Both grew up without their father, both got their father taken away from them. There's also like the way they mirror each other, and how like at least Iori was able to live a normal life because of what Samura did, whereas Chihiro didn't even get that opportunity. And you've talked a lot about before on the podcast about how like it's something that Chihiro wouldn't change for anything, right? But we saw how hard he fought to kind of preserve that for her, and also give her like the choice of if she wanted to keep her memories or not, because like I just said, like he knows how valuable his own memories are. And I'll let you talk more about that because I know it's something that you feel strongly about. But there is a really good case for Iori just based off that, again, that Samura connection and all the ways that her and Chihiro both parallel and mirror each other. I think there is a pretty strong case for Iori.
Yeah, and like you bring up good points, like with Iori and Chihiro like mirroring each other and like being almost like inverse examples of like war heroes, children of war heroes, where one had to not of her own volition, basically forego memories or forget memories of her father to have a normal life, whereas Chihiro went through being in hiding with his father every day. Two different lives, two completely different lives, but like it shows you just how impactful like a father figure can be, and with like the way I look at it is like Hiyuki introduces an aspect that is very interesting for like the overall terms of the power structure of the series. Like her joining the trio would be the most exciting, I think, whereas Iori's inclusion in the trio is more interesting to look at from like a character moment aspect, specifically with Chihiro. And obviously like her and Hakuri's like he's like a little puppy, everyone will get along with him, and with the added, now I am uncertain if she should be wielding Tobimune though. Now don't get me wrong, with her wielding Tobimune it does give them Crow. I mean, it gives them Crow obviously. Owl though, Owl would be huge, because then it basically will allow them to never get like surprised by an enchanted blade. They could keep track of like no enchanted blade level threats popping up on them, like because they'll see they'll know where they're at. And I would say Suzaku, a healing factor, like that's like super clutch to have, obviously, because I mean that's like the most utility right there. It's like healing and damage.
Yeah, that's when it comes to Iori wielding Tobimune, I think there is kind of like a neat opportunity to separate her from Samura. Obviously, like, Samura was on another level, right? He even grew, and grew probably isn't the right word, but he furthered his abilities, I guess. I'm forgetting what the correct verbiage was, but even in the time that he didn't have Tobimune, he was still able to further develop
Evolve.
his abilities. Evolve, correct. He was able to evolve further his abilities with Tobimune. The truth is that if Yori wields Tobimune, it won't be nothing even remotely close to what Samura was able to do. So, like, not to rain on your parade, but Owl, like, I have no reason to believe that her Owl would be able to cover more than like a block, you know? Like,
well, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying on the level of Samura, but you're not wrong either. But to cover, like, even if it's covering, because I mean, Samura was covering like cities. Like I like that motherfucker was affecting the weather, but her just covering one city, or it's like, you know, and 2 cities. I mean, obviously we don't know like the grand scale of like what it takes. We don't know her spirit capacity, but you know, you're definitely right. She definitely is not going to be like Samura 2.0. It would definitely be like, I don't want to call it vanilla Tobimune, but like more in the sense of just like, you know, whereas Samura was like viewed as this like powerhouse that was almost unbeatable to anybody but Akamura, you know, it would be a more condensed version, and obviously that fits more in like the main frame of the power structure to, like, you know, she would be below Chihiro in a sense, but still enough fighting force to you know, be out there. Plus, I also think with Hakuri and you know, hopefully his storehouse will be all right going forward, but Hakuri will also be able to register in the storehouse, and he can always pull her out if she's in danger. You know what I mean? Because she doesn't have the battle experience like, you know, the others. And we don't know how that's going to translate when it comes to like people who are genuinely strong coming for their life. You know, and specifically trying to take the Tobimune away from her. So Hakuri's going to be really important in that factor.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I'll say about Yori, kind of just relating to that, this is something that I haven't brought up in like a good minute. I think last time we talked about this might have been, you know, when Samura died. But I think her wielding Tobimune, and this is kind of like what I was going to say earlier, was that I think there's like a neat opportunity because Hokuzono could flesh her out and like flesh out the way she wields Tobimune. It kind of reminds me a bit of like of Chihiro early on with Enten, where like even the opponents would kind of make comments about how like, oh, you know, like I guess he's an immature wielder, you know, like how Enten wasn't all that. And I mean, even today you kind of still see people talk about how like Enten or the way Chihiro wields Enten is like really nothing compared to the other enchanted blades. It would be cool to see Yori wield Tobimune in a way that, okay, isn't as like, you know, large in scale and, you know, these insane abilities and just insane power like how Samura wielded Tobimune, but kind of like similar to how she's just, like you said, her EI White is just
compact, like a compact explosive, like, you know, like,
and like textbook, you know, like textbook, just practical,
like a spark plug. She had a little spark plug
usage. And specifically what I wanted to like mention that I hadn't brought up in a minute is that there's, you know, we consistently talk about this like duality of what it is to wield a katana, right? Because katanas are, you know, designed to kill people, but obviously there's this whole commentary within the narrative about like, well, it's also to protect people. That's the way they should be wielded, not just to kill, but to protect. And Iori could be like the perfect example of how an enchanted blade could be wielded without necessarily having to kill people. And this is something that, you know, what I was alluding to, that I remember bringing it up way back when, but we haven't really talked about it in a minute. And Yori wielding Tobimune could be like the perfect blueprint for how that can be done.
It's okay. It's not right to kill people, but it's okay to just cut off all their fingers.
Yeah, or just cut off their legs or whatever.
yeah, that's how you be. But no, you're cooking, because like she could be the poster child for what the enchanted blades should have been after the war.
Yes.
You know, like
yes.
Like that, like what Yura wanted, you know, like Samura's child is what Yura was looking for. Like in a weird sense, that sounds crazy, but just meaning her wielding Tobimune to be able to like pop up and, you know, protect the weak. like that definitely there's some cathartic about that for sure. And like I definitely like thinking about her power. Like one thing I think, they say like the wielder is infinitely mutable, like the true realm, and they can alter it. I think with Chihiro like facing off against Samura and Iori witnessing some of Tobi Mune's usage, I think like she would use like her usage of it would be just like Samura, but with like not as much finesse, but more like textbook, like more compact, more just to your point. Like that's definitely a good point of like her usage would be different, similar but a different flavor of Tobi Mune, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
like she's definitely the second most unique case for sure. I agree to that. Whereas like now this next one, Kiri, that's baby girl for you.
That's baby girl. Kamunabe.
I think like Kamunabe. Yeah. Oh man, remember I made that thumbnail and we didn't have her name yet, so I just put her on the picture of her. With her it's something super interesting because I think she just brings something. I don't want to say more for Hakuri, but I feel like I could see them two, like her. She's already been his protector during the Kabunabi raid, and almost kind of continuing that because Hakuri, him being out on the battlefield, he's I don't want to say he's a liability because he can still make clutch plays, and as we've seen at the end of the part 1, he was big with the core station vessel and all that, so he has his place to play. But he gets pressed, he's really like gonna be hurting. So Kiri's introduction in that and her station already in the story being that, I could see that continuing, as well as her introducing Chihiro to the originator, the progenitor of the AI White Purity style, her grandpa.
So Kiri is also interesting for her own reasons. Although she is probably my second favorite. I said Hiyuki was my favorite out of the three. Kiri, especially personality-wise, she's probably my second favorite. But I do have to admit that I think she has the weakest argument, or like the weakest case for being this third member of this trio. You do bring up some great points. She's already interacted quite a bit with Hakuri. She's fought alongside him. They were even like able to coordinate against Yuki Sada. They both kind of like shared an encounter with Ikuto. Everything like that whole interaction in the Kamunabi raid is very well done. Like I said, she personality wise, I like her fighting style. There is an interesting connection in terms of, like you said, she could be the bridge that kind of brings us to an appearance, present day appearance of Itsuo Shurikai, rather than just like flashbacks or him being talked about. So they're like little tidbits that I think would make her a cool member of the trio and what that can bring. But that's kind of it for me. Like I don't have like anything else in terms of what I think. And granted, this is also because she was the most recent one to be introduced, and she's introduced in a stacked arc that is like constantly switching the spotlight on everything that's going on. So like,
bro, like think about this: Natsuki, Ibiki, Hokuto, and her were all like right next to each other in terms of like introductions. That's alone. On top of the Hishaku teleporting in, we got to see the other Hishaku members. So like, she came in at a cluttered time, but
yes, like
I think she would bring the most like, she'd bring like something different to the team for sure. But other than that, I mean, like I said, it'd be more for like, I could see for Hakuri to a certain degree, and really just kind of bridging that gap for Chihiro and Itsuo to meet. Which, I mean, like maybe that Chihiro can like advance his AI White Purity style. Maybe the old man basically was hiding a secret like move of the AI White Purity style that only he has, or some shit. Like
Yeah.
you never know, but I do think she has the weakest case for sure, which, I guess that can kind of, unless you have anything else you want to talk about.
I mean, I guess last thing I'll say about Kiri is that, again, personality-wise, I just thinking about this now, because we also haven't really seen her interact with Chihiro. I think that is also a dynamic that would be very fun to see, just because of like how their personalities, I think, would mesh. Chihiro's a lot more stoic and, it isn't all too expressive unless kind of like the moment really warrants it. I think her personality would be fun to see alongside Chihiro, putting, like we talked about Hiyuki, like all these moral and dynamics in terms of relating to ideals, like putting that aside, I think Kiri is kind of like, I think would be the most fun to see interact with Chihiro, just because I think she's like very lighthearted.
That's a good shout.
Yeah, and obviously, like, we already saw how she interacts with Chihiro. You could see her Hiyuki, I'm sorry, you could see Kiri and Hakuri kind of like team up and banter against Chihiro, if I can say like that, kind of like that sort of thing, that sort of dynamic. I think would be
she almost
pretty fun.
Introduces like a comic relief character in a trio, where like Hakuri's always down for what Chihiro wants to do, and everyone that meets Chihiro is like kind of like, they're impressed by him or they want to follow him, but like Kiri being the one that's just not enthused with Chihiro would be funny to see. Like everyone's like usually like, oh, Chihiro's like, you want to follow him, he's so serious and cool, and then she's just like, wait, what'd you say? Like texting, and she like looks up from her phone, and she could add that, but I mean,
like,
that would
so
definitely
type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we might need the comic relief going forward where we're headed.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess, now that we kind of touched on, each of these characters, is, who do you see becoming part of the trio?
Drum roll, none of them.
Same here, brother. Like, bro, me and Dice didn't really talk about this too much. We, kind of like ping pong back some ideas with each other, but it's so funny that this is how we kind of like both came to the same conclusion. Just Kagurabachi's just not structured like other Shonen Jump battle series.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, I think we've also talked about the way Hakuri, and I don't want to judge too quickly, right? Like we have to wait till we get back to present day and how Hokuzono goes about like tackling these character dynamics. But we saw how quickly Hakuri got sidelined. Like after the Rakuzaichi, you would think like, oh damn, like this guy is gonna be like right there with Chihiro. We're gonna see him, we're gonna see like this duo just go crazy. We're gonna see them kind of like parallel each other in growth. And not that Hakuri hasn't done his thing, because he was very important obviously in the SBA, he was very important in the Kamunabi raid, but the truth is that in terms of his presence in the story and the focus, he's been kind of sidelined. He doesn't give kind of like a member
Deuteragonist. You don't give Deuteragonist right hand man energy anymore. Like,
yeah, and
he was framed to be. Yeah, I mean, that was my biggest like issue with Kaminabi, the Raid of Kaminabi, because the end of part 1, I felt like Hokuzono prioritized the Samura storyline of it instead of Hakuri, and I always looked at Hakuri as Chihiro's right hand man, but the fact that they didn't see each other since what was it, chapter 50, like around there, 58 or something like that. That was the last time they saw each other, and then we don't even get to see their reunion. And people are gonna say like, oh, well, we'll see it in a flashback. I want to see it. If it's that important, show us the, like, we didn't even get to see Hakuri, like what happened with him, and they got teleported to the same place. So, like, I mean, I'm not gonna start ranting, but that did definitely that definitely made me like look at Kagurabachi and kind of just like, not that it's a negative thing about Kagurabachi, because I'm not saying that, more in the sense of like just viewing it differently in terms of like story structures, that this is basically the Chihiro show, and
Yeah.
sure, we're not getting Chihiro in the flashback, obviously, because he'd be in his dad's nuts. Okay, that's why we're not getting Chihiro in the flashback. And then like, of course, we had a stint of what, he like 12 chapters without him, or maybe it was like 13 chapters or something like that before he pops it back up in 101. But I mean, it's the Chihiro show. Hakuri is going to be a part of it and be a big part of it. But like what he is as a right-hand man is very different than, say, like, well, I mean, I was about to say like Sasuke and Naruto, but then I mean, Sasuke just went and dipped on a leaf, so But like, even still, that being the case, it's still like they just don't give that. I mean, also Naruto and Sasuke had a lot, had a good bit of them in their childhood together. But like there's so many examples of that, and it's almost like that role is kind of like a shifting seat. It's kind of like musical chairs in Kagurabachi.
That's a good way to look at it, because also like when you go back and in the first arc we see his dynamic again, with somebody like Char, right? And she's a character that obviously she's a little kid, right? It makes sense why she gets sidelined. But we see him interact with characters like Char, like Hinao. Obviously, I'm not even counting Shiba Nizami, but more so looking at the youngins, right? And then we see him interact with Hakuri and how that kind of develops. And, obviously Hiyuki, Yori, the way everything is kind of like being set up around Chihiro with all these characters, it's really just, and this is gonna sound kind of corny or cheesy or whatever, but the truth is that the way I see it is just like, it's just kind of like one big family for Chihiro. And I think by the end of it, like when it's all said and done, I think that's what we're gonna see is gonna be ultimately what is Chihiro's family, which is something that he didn't really have growing up. It was just him and his dad, and obviously his dad was taken from him. So I think it's much more likely that these characters just form part of Chihiro's circle, and that each character impacts Chihiro's character in just different ways. But like you said, I don't really think that the way the story has framed them so far, it's been in a way where it's setting up this very clear trio where these three specific characters bounce off each other's, and who's like personal narratives and personal motivations kind of like intertwined with each other. Like there's not really much of that. Like again, the closest thing we got to that was Hakuri in the Rakuzaichi, and nobody else has even come close.
And
like
they just met that arc, by the way.
Yeah, and like again, you could argue like I think Yori again has like a very interesting case just because of the connection to Samura and everything we already went through, but that's it, right? And even then it wasn't enough to really make me feel like, oh no, that's it, that's her. Like it's, we don't even know if she's gonna wield Tobimune, and like, okay, maybe she doesn't have to wield Tobimune, but then I don't know. I just, at the end of the day, I haven't really seen enough from neither of these characters, Hiyuki, Yori, or Akiri, to make me feel, and also Hakuri, like we talked about, outside of the Rakuzaichi, to really make me feel like, okay, we have our trio. No, it's just like you said, it's kind of been just like a revolving door, and everybody's like, just kind of had their moments.
We talking about a trio, motherfucker. We need to look for a consistent right hand for a Chihiro first. Like we don't got a duo really, the way the story like frames it. And you bring up good points. That is like found family. I think that's the whole thing. Is Chihiro learns from experiences, and every arc he's basically picking up a new experience. Hakuri comes in, and then he's literally, because of his brain damage, he's sidelined like next arc, and we don't see him again for quite some time, because like the Kyoto bloodshed's going on. And then Iori, like every time we meet a character like that could be influential to like a team dynamic, we don't see them again for a bit of time. There's no like Hakuri's got the most consistency as being, that's why we consider him as like the still Chihiro's right hand man. And like I would still call him that, but he's just not in the sense of like Zoro is for Luffy. No one has like predefined roles in a group.
Yes.
And I think that like you kind of said it really well. It's about kind of like a one big family, him kind of like experiencing the world, and basically learning from other people's experiences and growing from that and helping them lift their curse or whatever it may be. Like I can almost see Hakuri going back and becoming the head of the Sazanami clan at the end of the story, changing it, making it for the better with his brother and sister that are still alive, and hopefully Soya won't be there. And like, but with Iori and like answer, like I think, like I said, for Hiyuki is like, I basically said the reasons why. I almost think she's too powerful in a sense to like for her to be like limited to a 3-man trio type setup. That doesn't have to be the case. That's just how I feel. And then with Iori, I kind of feel like it's a detriment and dangerous to let her go out in the field with Tobimune. Like the level of threat in the story now has raised dramatically.
That's a fair point, yeah.
And she's just a schoolgirl. Now, don't get me wrong. She is a really good swordsman, and her synchronization with Tobimune would be really good because she's a trained swordsman. Her usage of the blade would automatically be there, so she would synchronize with it, pretty quickly. But, if she doesn't want, the people she's going up against are dogs that are ready to kill and use innocent people. She's used to dojos with, like things like that with sword training.
Yeah, she's still closing her eyes.
Yeah, like, and that's what I'm saying. I think like just her experiences, it would take a lot of changing character and resolve on her part to like wield it in a battlefield. And I'm not saying she couldn't. I'm just saying, me personally, I don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, kind of like how we already touched on, I think what's really great about these characters is how not just how they impact Chihiro, but how Chihiro allows himself to be impacted by them, right? Like obviously that whole dynamic between Hiyuki and the Chihiro in the Rakuzaichi, it's great. I mean, we even see that she's one of the people he thinks of when he's forging the new blade. Obviously, we talked about like Iori and Chihiro, and to the lengths that he was willing to go to just allow her to have a choice. And with Kiri, then we have yet to see him really interact with. So I guess the last question I'll pose to you is, if you had to pick one, because we kind of went for a cop out, but if you had to pick one, who would you pick?
Iori. Even though I said as a detriment, like, because I just can't see the other two playing as big of a part. Like Kiri is kind of like, I could see her being like Natsuki, where they're with us but they're not like the group. Iori feels like somebody that's going to be there, through, because what Samura means to Chihiro. I feel like she just has the most cards to play in terms of like sticking with Chihiro. Now maybe she just goes off with Masumi and they hide her away somewhere, sure. Like with Hiyuki, aside from her being powerful, like you mentioned, Chihiro thinks about her when he's at the end of part 1, and she talks about in that panel that there's no way they should be used for interests of one individual, talking about the enchanted blades. Like she is an kind of an op to Chihiro in a sense. Like a lot of her dialogue with Chihiro is like, after this we're gonna like settle it. Like she knows he's a good person and that he's like he'll do the right thing, but they don't agree on the usage of the enchanted blades, obviously. But like things are getting out of hand, and we don't know. Like it's not like she's just like completely sold on Chihiro and him using Enten. You know what I mean? Like, go read we're going to read the Rakuzaichi for Redux coming up next. And, I'm looking forward to like seeing exactly how I feel about Hiyuki after that. You know, because like I know she sticks up for him in the meeting, but that's only because Chihiro's trying to join the Kabunabi to make contact with the other sword bearers to protect everything. That's not because, you know, for anything else. That's like, you know, because they even say, even Kazan says, well, his bitch ass. After that, then they're enemies in a sense.
Yeah. So I'm gonna be very honest. I do think that all things considered, Yori kind of just edges the other two out. I do, in terms of like who I think the most logical answer would be, like who I think would kind of I don't know. In a lot of ways, I do kind of think Yori would make the most sense.
Narratively.
Yeah, but I'm biased, so I gotta say, me personally, I would like to see that if I'm gonna choose one, right, which is the question I posed to you, I would choose Hiyuki.
Okay, well, if the one I want to see is Hiyuki in the main trio, but if the one I think that fits narratively the best, I think it's Iori. I guess
That's
like
fair. I think I agree with that. Yeah, I said, I like Hiyuki, and I think it would be interesting. Like, let's say that she is kind of like part of the trio, even if it's temporary, to see like that kind of like how that unfolds, right? To see her kind of go back, you know, as both an antagonist and somebody that's also kind of like standing next to Chihiro, as long as their interests and their ideals are aligned. The moment she starts to have doubts, it would be actually very interesting to see her clash once again against Chihiro.
yeah, and like seeing the switch with becoming an enemy of the state.
Yeah.
You know, because Akamura is going to be praised, and we saw how people like were revering him at the end of part 1. Him becoming the head of the Kabanabi is only going to strengthen that bond he has with the citizens. Or, I mean, I don't even know if the real citizens like know who Kazan is. You know what I mean? But Akamura is going to make it known like who he is and his part, like what role he has. And so every time they defeat one of Akamura's people going forward, when we cut back, they're going to be like viewed as villains, most wanted, booed at by the people that end up seeing them. You know what I mean? Like, and it's gonna be interesting to see Hiyuki with such a strong, strong sense of justice face that reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, poor Kiri, huh? Damn, she didn't win the popular vote or the narrative vote.
And I really like her, man. It is what it is, right?
Yeah, but hey, hopefully she could still introduce us to Itsuo Shirikai at some point.
Yeah, I think she's still gonna do some great stuff.
Yeah, like learn how to break dance with her sword. She'd be OP.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see like if Hokuzono really follows through on her motivations. But there's a lot to juggle right now in the story, so I'm tempering my expectations.
You're gonna kill your grandpa. He's got to be like almost 90. Like,
yeah,
he's still probably stronger than her. That's the thing. Well, he for sure is. He's fighting bears and shit. But
yeah. But yeah, quite a lengthy conversation. I think we both thought that this was gonna be much shorter.
Yeah, and I mean, I was kind of yapping a bit, but I like all three of these characters.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think we'll wrap it up here. That way we could get this thing under 50 minutes.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and catch you next time. Peace.
Peace.